Picture a world where the heart of the Catholic Church didn't beat in Rome, but in a sleepy French city along the Rhone River. For nearly 70 years, from 1309 to 1377, the popes ruled not from the Eternal City but from Avignon, a period shrouded in secrets, scandals, and power plays so intense they'd make modern politics look tame. This wasn't just a relocation, it was a seismic shift that reshaped religion, money, and empire. Why would the Vatican's leadership abandon Rome, and what dark ambitions lurked behind this move? The Avignon Papacy isn't just a footnote in history, it's a gripping tale of corruption, rivalry, and hidden agendas that few dare to fully unravel. Think about the sheer audacity of it, a pope declaring that God's will demanded he live not among the ancient churches of Rome, but in a lavish palace built with gold squeezed from the faithful. Avignon became a spectacle of wealth and power, a stark contrast to the humility preached from the pulpit. Behind its towering walls, deals were struck, enemies were silenced, and the very soul of the church was bought and sold. But this wasn't just about one man's greed, it was a calculated power grab by kings and cardinals alike, each vying to control an institution that held Europe in its grip. The money flowing through Avignon would make billionaires blush, and the political schemes, they'd put any thriller novel to shame. So what really happened during those turbulent decades? Why does the Avignon Papacy still spark debates among historians today? Some call it a captivity, others a clever maneuver, but one thing's certain: the truth is far messier than the official records suggest. From whispered conspiracies in the papal court to shocking acts of rebellion by those who dared to defy it, this is a story of ambition gone wild, and as we peel back the layers, you'll start to see how the echoes of Avignon still shape the world we live in now. Stick with me, because what unfolds next isn't just history, it's a warning about what happens when power goes unchecked. To understand how Avignon became the new Vatican, we need to rewind to the early 1400s, a time when the Church wasn't just a spiritual authority, but a political powerhouse tangled in Europe's dynastic wars. The French king, Philip IV, wasn't just a monarch, he was a master manipulator. His nickname, the Fair, hid a ruthless streak when he clashed with the Knights Templar, a wealthy military order answering only to the Pope. He didn't just want to defeat them. He aimed to control them. The Templars' legendary treasure and influence made them a threat, so Philip fabricated charges of heresy, arresting hundreds in a single night. But to dismantle the order, he needed the Pope's blessing. Enter Clement V, a former archbishop from Bordeaux with deep ties to the French crown. Elected in 1305 amid rumors of Philip's interference, Clement was no fool, but he was pragmatic. With Rome in chaos, plagued by feuding noble families and unsafe for the papal court, he saw an opportunity. Moving to Avignon wasn't just about safety, it was survival. The city sat just outside French territory, but close enough for Philip to exert pressure. Its location on the Rhone River made it a trade hub, perfect for diplomacy and finance, and crucially, it was far from the dagger-wielding factions of Rome. But here's the twist: Clement never intended Avignon to be permanent. What started as a temporary refuge morphed into a 70-year power shift. Philip's relentless demands, first to destroy the Templars, then to install French cardinals who tied the papacy to French interests. Soon the lavish palace of the popes rose from Avignon's skyline, a symbol of both spiritual authority and political submission. Gold flowed in from church taxes, funding a court so extravagant that even Petrarch, the famous poet, called it the Babylon of the West. This wasn't just a change of address, it was a silent coup. With each new French-appointed cardinal, the papacy's independence eroded. By the time Gregory XI finally returned to Rome in 1377, the church was fractured, sparking a schism that would last decades. Avignon proved something dangerous. When faith and politics collide, even the holiest thrones aren't safe from earthly ambitions. The Palais des Papes wasn't just a residence, it was a statement carved in stone. Towering over Avignon, its walls weren't built for prayer alone, they were designed to intimidate. Imagine a fortress so massive it could house an entire court, with halls dripping in tapestries and vaulted ceilings that echoed with whispered conspiracies. This wasn't divine architecture, it was a power play. The palace's sheer scale, completed in just 20 years, screamed one thing: the church wasn't just a spiritual force anymore. It was a kingdom, but behind the gilded chapels and marble courtyards lay secrets thicker than the palace walls. Whispers swirled about hidden chambers, rooms tucked behind bookcases or beneath altars, where cardinals brokered deals away from prying eyes. Some say the papal treasury, overflowing with gold from indulgences and taxes, was buried deep underground, accessible only through labyrinthine passages. Others spoke of midnight meetings in the Grand Tunnel, the banquet hall where feasts masked political summits. Diplomats, spies, and bankers gathered under the guise of piety, trading favors like chess pieces. The palace's very layout betrayed its dual purpose. The Pope's private quarters, the Chamber du Cerf, featured frescoes of hunting scenes, a bizarre choice for a man of God, until you realize it mirrored the predatory diplomacy of the age. Meanwhile, the consistory hall, where foreign ambassadors knelt, was positioned so sunlight streamed in behind the papal throne, casting the Pope's shadow over visitors like an omen. Every archway, every mural, was a calculated symbol of control, and then there were the rumors no ledger could confirm, stories of secret tunnels snaking beneath the Rhone, used to smuggle gold or fugitives. Whispers that certain heretical manuscripts, banned elsewhere, were hoarded in private libraries for the Pope's inner circle. Even the palace's construction raised eyebrows. How did the Church afford such extravagance? The answer lay in the pockets of everyday believers, taxed relentlessly to fund what critics called the Babylon of the West. By the time the last Avignon Pope fled back to Rome, the palace stood as a monument to ambition's triumph over humility. Its empty halls became a warning. When faith builds fortresses, who truly holds the keys? The Palais des Papes didn't just house popes, it exposed how easily sacred power could be twisted into something shockingly human. Philip IV didn't just want influence over the church, he wanted to own it. His grip on the Avignon Papacy wasn't subtle, it was a stranglehold disguised as diplomacy. Take the Templars. When Philip needed their vast wealth to fund his wars, he didn't negotiate, he manufactured a crisis. In 1307, his agents fanned out across France at dawn, arresting hundreds of knights on trumped-up charges of heresy and blasphemy. But here's the catch: the Templars answered only to the Pope. To dismantle them, Philip needed Clement V's blessing, and he got it through a mix of threats and bribes so blatant they shocked even medieval Europe. The trials that followed were a sham. Under torture, Templars confessed to obscene rituals, from spitting on the cross to worshipping demonic idols. Clement, though hesitant, eventually dissolved the order in 1312, handing its lands and gold to Philip. But this wasn't justice, it was a robbery sanctioned by the Church itself. The message was clear: the Pope's authority could be bent to a king's will, and the Templars were just the beginning. Philip's real innovation was financial. He strong-armed Clement into creating the annates, a tax that siphoned a year's income from every newly appointed bishop or abbot straight into French coffers. Overnight, the Church became a revenue stream for the French crown. Bishops were no longer spiritual leaders, they were cash cows, their appointments sold to the highest bidder. The annates bled dioceses dry from England to Germany, sparking outrage, but with the papacy planted in Avignon, critics had no recourse. Then came the Holy Roman Empire. When Philip clashed with Emperor Henry VII, Clement under pressure backed France, even excommunicating Henry's allies. The papacy, meant to be a neutral arbiter of Christendom, now acted as France's attack dog. Chroniclers of the time wrote of cardinals whispering in the palace halls, their robes lined with French gold. By the time Philip died in 1314, he'd reshaped the church into a political weapon. But the cost was staggering. Faithful across Europe began asking if the Pope was just a French puppet who was truly running God's house. The Avignon Papacy didn't just move the Vatican, it mortgaged its soul. Money wasn't just changing hands in Avignon, it was reshaping faith itself. The papal court's glittering facade hid a financial machine so sophisticated it would make modern bankers blush. At its heart, families like the Bardi and Peruzzi, Florentine banking dynasties that functioned as the 14th century's shadow treasury, these weren't mere lenders, they were the puppeteers of papal policy. When Clement V needed cash to build his palace or fund French wars, he didn't turn to prayer, he turned to ledger books. The Bardi alone loaned the equivalent of millions in today's currency, with interest rates cloaked as donations. But the real scandal wasn't the debt, it was what the popes offered as collateral. Indulgences, promises of reduced time in purgatory became the church's hottest commodity. For the right price, a wealthy sinner could buy absolution for anything, from adultery to murder. Letters stamped with the papal seal guaranteed salvation, sold by traveling friars who haggled like marketplace vendors. The system reeked of desperation. When the Peruzzi Bank teetered on collapse after overextending loans to the papacy, Pope John XXII didn't forgive the debt. He simply authorized more indulgences, flooding Europe with spiritual IOUs. Critics whispered that Avignon's gold wasn't just tarnished, it was damned. But the corruption ran deeper than finance. Church offices became family heirlooms. Nepotism wasn't an occasional lapse, it was policy. When Benedict XII needed a new bishop, he didn't look for piety, he looked for relatives. His nephew, a teenager with no theological training, became a cardinal overnight. Meanwhile, the Bardi family's agents sat in on papal audits, their influence so blatant that one chronicler wrote, "The counting house has replaced the confessional." This wasn't just greed, it was a betrayal. The same practices that funded Avignon's splendor, simony, extortion, the monetization of grace, would later ignite Martin Luther's fury. When reformers centuries later nailed indictments to church doors, they weren't just protesting theology, they were exposing a system perfected in the palace halls of Avignon, where faith had become a transaction and salvation bore a price tag. The irony, the very bankers who propped up the papacy would collapse under its debts, leaving behind a lesson as old as the Bible itself: when holy power trades in gold, it's always the faithful who pay. The term Babylonian captivity wasn't just medieval spin, it was a loaded metaphor meant to sting. Petrarch, the poet who popularized the phrase, didn't mince words. Watching Avignon's papal court drown in luxury, he saw parallels with the ancient Israelites enslaved in Babylon, their faith diluted by foreign influence. But was this comparison fair, or was it propaganda wielded by Romans desperate to drag the papacy home? The truth lies somewhere between captivity and complicity. Take Pope Clement V, the first Avignon pontiff. Documents show he initially resisted Philip IV's pressure, even delaying the Templar trials for years. But when French troops encircled his coronation city, Lyon, Clement's defiance crumbled. Was he a prisoner or a pragmatist? His letters reveal a man trapped not by chains, but by circumstance. Rome was a battleground of warring clans. Avignon offered stability, yet stability came at a cost. Every French cardinal appointed, every tax levied, tightened Philip's grip. Later popes like Benedict XII took a different approach. A reformer by reputation, he tried to curb excess, only to watch French cardinals veto his decrees. When he proposed returning to Rome, riots erupted in the streets. Were the riots organic, or staged by French interests? Chroniclers noted the sudden appearance of mercenaries, persuading Benedict to stay. Meanwhile, the papal treasury financed French wars, blurring the line between church and state. Then there's the smoking gun, the conclave of 1334. Under French King Philip VI's supervision, the College of Cardinals elected a pope in just 2 days, a record speed that reeked of coercion, the winner. Benedict XII's successor, Clement VI, a bon vivant who expanded the palace's wine cellars while France annexed church lands, yet some popes played the game willingly. Urban V, a rare ascetic, returned to Rome in 1367, only to flee back to Avignon when Roman nobles threatened revolt. His retreat proved Avignon wasn't just a French plot, it was a refuge from chaos. So was it captivity, not in the literal sense, but when faith becomes collateral for political survival, does it matter if the chains are invisible? The Babylonian captivity metaphor stuck because it captured a deeper truth. In Avignon, the papacy didn't just serve God. It served an empire. Pope John XXII didn't just ruffle feathers, he set the entire church on fire. Imagine a pope so defiant that even saints in heaven weren't safe from his revisions. In the 1330s, John dropped a theological bombshell. He claimed the souls of the saved wouldn't behold the face of God, the beatific vision, until the final judgment. This wasn't some obscure footnote, it struck at the heart of medieval Christianity, where the promise of divine union after death was the ultimate reward. Overnight funeral sermons across Europe became awkward. Grieving families wondered, were their loved ones stuck in limbo, denied heaven's fullness? The backlash was instantaneous. Theologians like William of Ockham, already wary of papal overreach, saw heresy in John's stance. Ockham, famous for his razor-sharp logic, dissected the Pope's argument with surgical precision. If the Church could err on something as fundamental as salvation itself, he argued, then papal authority wasn't infallible, it was negotiable. This wasn't academic nitpicking. Ockham's critique became a rallying cry for reformers who saw Avignon as a den of corruption. Even more damning, John's own predecessors had taught the opposite. When confronted with ancient texts affirming the beatific vision, John doubled down, insisting tradition could evolve. His enemies whispered he'd gone mad, or worse, sold orthodoxy for French favor. But the controversy exposed a deeper tension. John wasn't just a maverick, he was a lawyer by training, obsessed with tidy theological categories. To him, souls enjoying heaven before Judgment Day created a paradox. How could the saved be complete if history hadn't ended? His solution, deferring the vision, was logical but tone-deaf. It ignored centuries of mystical tradition, from Augustine to Bernard of Clairvaux, who described the saintly dead as already drinking from the fountain of life. The fallout was brutal. King Philip VI of France, no fan of drama, summoned John to explain himself. Crowds gathered outside the palace, shouting for retraction. Even John's cardinals warned of schism. In a stunning reversal, the Pope recanted on his deathbed in 1334, murmuring that the saved indeed saw God clearly and face to face. The episode left scars. If a pope could flip-flop on eternity, what else was up for grabs? For critics like Ockham, John's waffling proved Avignon had broken the Church, not just politically, but spiritually. The papacy's crown of authority now had cracks no amount of French gold could mend. Pope Benedict XII might have looked like a reformer on paper, a Cistercian monk who vowed to clean up the Church's excesses, but beneath that austere exterior lurked a man who understood power's sharpest edges. His reign from 1334 to 1342 wasn't just about piety, it was about control, and no group felt that control more brutally than the Fraticelli, a radical offshoot of the Franciscans who took vows of poverty so seriously they denounced the Avignon Papacy as a den of corruption. To Benedict, they weren't just heretics, they were a threat to the very system that kept the papal machine running. The Fraticelli's crime, they preached what the Franciscans had originally championed, that the Church should own nothing, no lands, no palaces, no gold. In an era where Avignon's wealth was on grotesque display, their message resonated with the poor and the disillusioned, but Benedict wasn't having it. His response wasn't just suppression, it was annihilation. Friars were rounded up, their makeshift monasteries torched. Those who refused to recant faced the stake, their executions public spectacles meant to terrify others into silence. Chroniclers recorded scenes of Fraticelli followers singing hymns as flames consumed them, their defiance a stark contrast to the gilded hypocrisy of the papal court. Yet Benedict's crackdown wasn't just about silencing dissent, it was a calculated move to consolidate authority. He understood that to rule from Avignon, a city dripping in luxury, he needed an iron grip on doctrine. So he turned the Fraticelli into a warning: challenge the Pope's right to wealth, and you challenge God himself. At the same time, he streamlined the Church's bureaucracy, creating a web of tribunals and tax collectors that made Avignon the administrative heart of Christendom. Every bishop's appointment, every abbey's finances, now flowed through his office. The irony: Benedict's reforms backfired. By centralizing power, he made the papacy more vulnerable to criticism. The Fraticelli's ashes became a rallying cry for reformers who asked, if the Church was truly Christ's bride, why did it need armies and accountants? Benedict's legacy wasn't just a pile of bodies, it was the unmasking of a papacy that feared poverty more than heresy. Pope Clement VI didn't just rule during the Black Death, he partied through it. While corpses piled up in the streets of Europe, Avignon's papal court sparkled with feasts so extravagant they defied belief. Gold plates piled high with roasted peacocks, wine flowing from fountains, and musicians playing as if death itself had been uninvited. Clement, a man who once joked he'd live as a sinner since all are doomed anyway, embodied the grotesque disconnect between the Church's opulence and the suffering outside its walls. But this wasn't just decadence, it was a calculated performance of power. In a world unraveling, the palace's excess sent a message: even the apocalypse couldn't touch God's anointed. The Black Death hit Avignon like a hammer. By 1348, the city's graveyards overflowed, forcing mass burials in the Rhone. Yet inside the Palais des Papes, Clement hosted masquerades where cardinals danced in jeweled masks, not to ward off plague, but to mock it. His inner circle included artists, alchemists, and even a court jester who performed skits about dying peasants. Chroniclers wrote of the Pope's private chambers, where walls were padded with silk to keep out the stench of death. But the most damning rumors swirled around his response to the crisis. As thousands begged for last rites, Clement's chancery began selling plague dispensations, his special blessings guaranteeing a swift passage to heaven for those who died without confession. The price: a year's wages for most families. Critics called it sacrilege. Theologians like Birgitta of Sweden accused Clement of trading in souls, turning desperation into profit. But the Pope had a pragmatic defense: the Church needed funds to care for the sick. True, Avignon's hospitals did expand under his watch, with monks tending to the infected. Yet records show only a fraction of the dispensation gold reached the poor. The rest financed Clement's pet projects: a new wing for the palace, a private zoo stocked with exotic animals, and bribes to keep French nobles loyal. Then came the whispers of darker deals. Some claimed Clement's bankers hoarded grain to inflate prices, selling it back to starving cities at a premium. Others said his physicians experimented on plague victims, testing elixirs made from crushed gemstones. Whether true or not, the stories stuck, painting a portrait of a pope who saw catastrophe as an opportunity. By the time Clement died in 1352, not from plague, but from a gluttony-induced stroke, his legacy was sealed. In an age of terror, he'd proven one horrifying truth: even when the world ends, there will always be men willing to sell salvation, or charge admission to the feast. The Avignon Papacy didn't just watch the 100 Years' War unfold, it engineered it. Behind closed doors, popes like Clement VI and Innocent VI became master puppeteers, pulling strings between England and France with the precision of chess grandmasters. Take the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360. On the surface, it was a peace deal to pause the bloodshed, but dig deeper and you'll find Avignon's fingerprints all over it. The papal court didn't just mediate, it rigged the terms. Clement VI, though officially neutral, leaned hard on France's King John II to cede lands to England, lands that just happened to border church territories needing protection. Coincidence hardly, marriages were another weapon in Avignon's arsenal. When Edward III of England sought alliances to bolster his claim to the French throne, Innocent VI didn't just bless unions, he brokered them. But there was always a catch. A proposed match between Edward's son and a French princess fell through abruptly when Avignon discovered a previously overlooked blood relation, conveniently voiding the treaty that would have weakened French leverage. Chroniclers noted how papal legates shuffled between courts with sealed letters, their contents so explosive that kings sometimes burned them unread. Then there were the loans. The Avignon Papacy didn't just fund wars, it bankrolled both sides. Records show the same Florentine bankers handling English gold also funneled French payments, with the Curia taking a cut. When Edward defaulted on his debts, the Pope didn't excommunicate him. Instead, he quietly extended the terms, knowing a victorious England could be bullied into better concessions later. But Avignon's most audacious move was playing the long game. By prolonging the war, the papacy ensured Europe's monarchs remained too divided to challenge its authority. Every truce brokered was just fragile enough to break. Every peace treaty had loopholes only the Pope could exploit. The result, a century of chaos that kept kings on their knees and the Church firmly in control. The lesson was clear. In Avignon's hands, diplomacy wasn't about ending wars, it was about owning them. Pope Innocent VI's death in 1362 should have been routine, another elderly pontiff passing in his sleep. But the whispers started before his body was even cold. The man who'd spent his reign trying to wrench the papacy from French control suddenly collapsed after a private dinner, his face twisted in agony. No physician was summoned, no autopsy performed. Within hours his chambers were scrubbed clean, and the official story was set, natural causes, yet those closest to him noted the timing. Just weeks earlier, Innocent had made a move that shook the French court to its core. He'd refused to appoint another French cardinal, defying King John II's demands. The message was clear: Avignon would no longer be a puppet regime. The dinner itself reeked of conspiracy. Witnesses recalled an unfamiliar servant presenting the Pope with a goblet of spiced wine, a gift, he claimed, from a devoted benefactor. Innocent, known for his frugal habits, drank reluctantly. By midnight he was convulsing, his lips flecked with foam. The speed of his decline matched classic accounts of arsenic poisoning, a favorite tool of medieval assassins. But the investigation, if you could call it, was a farce. The servant vanished, the goblet disappeared, even the Pope's personal physician, a Frenchman with ties to the royal court, declared the death an act of God before the body cooled. What really sealed the theory of foul play were the documents. Innocent had been drafting a bull to reclaim papal territories seized by the French crown, land worth a king's ransom in taxes. The draft vanished from his desk the night he died. Decades later, a scribe's marginal note in the Vatican archives would hint that the bull had been burned by order of the Sacred College. The college, of course, was stacked with French cardinals. The aftermath was telling. Innocent's successor, Urban V, was elected in record time, a compromise candidate acceptable to both Rome and Paris. His first act, reversing Innocent's policies and appointing 3 new French cardinals. As for the whispers of murder, they were drowned out by the clink of gold changing hands. In Avignon, even a pope's death could be bought and sold. The only question left was how many throats the truth would have to slit before it stayed buried. Urban V's return to Rome should have been a triumph, a holy homecoming to reunite the papacy with its ancient roots. Instead, it became a fiasco that exposed just how deeply Avignon's corruption had taken hold. When the pious Benedictine monk-turned-pope sailed into Italy's port of Corneto in 1367, cheering crowds lined the streets, but the celebration was short-lived. Within months, Rome's nobility, gangs of armed mercenaries, and even the city's crumbling infrastructure conspired to make his stay unbearable. Was this just bad luck? Or did the French crown, desperate to keep the papacy under its thumb, engineer the chaos? The problems began immediately. Rome in the 1400s was a shadow of its former glory. The aqueducts were broken, leaving the city parched. Basilicas stood half-collapsed, their roofs open to the sky. Even the papal residence at the Lateran Palace was so dilapidated that Urban had to sleep in a makeshift wooden hut. But the real danger wasn't the ruins, it was the people. The powerful Roman barons, led by the warlord Giovanni di Vico, saw Urban's return as a threat to their autonomy. They stirred up mobs to riot, demanding the Pope distribute gold they claimed was owed to the city. Meanwhile, mercenaries hired by the French crown, conveniently disguised as independent contractors, roamed the countryside, cutting supply lines and ambushing papal envoys. Coincidence? Records show French cardinals in Avignon quietly diverted funds meant for Rome's restoration, ensuring Urban's mission would starve. Urban's own missteps didn't help. A scholar at heart, he underestimated the brutality of Italian politics. When Di Vico's thugs set fire to the Vatican granaries, Urban responded with sermons instead of soldiers. His refusal to arm his guards, a vow of pacifism from his monkish days, left him defenseless as bandits looted the city. Even his allies turned against him. St. Bridget of Sweden, a mystic whose prophecies Urban revered, publicly scolded him for lacking the spine of a shepherd. The final blow came when plague broke out in 1370, decimating his already skeletal court. Yet the most damning evidence of sabotage lies in Avignon's ledgers. Just weeks before Urban fled back to France in 1370, a secret payment from the French royal treasury cleared through a Florentine bank earmarked for services rendered by a certain Giovanni di Vico. The message was clear: Rome's chaos had been a transaction. Urban died just months after returning to Avignon, some say of heartbreak. His tombstone, fittingly, bears no mention of Rome, only a cryptic epitaph: he tried to go home. But in Avignon's golden cage, home was never really an option. Urban V's disastrous retreat from Rome didn't just humiliate the papacy, it lit the fuse for an explosion that would tear the church apart. When Gregory XI finally succeeded where his predecessor failed, returning the papal court to Rome in 1377, he assumed the crisis was over. Instead, his death just a year later plunged Christendom into chaos. The conclave to elect his successor became a battleground. Roman mobs surrounded the Vatican, screaming for an Italian pope or else. The cardinals, many still loyal to Avignon's lavish comforts, caved under the pressure, electing Urban VI, but his reign quickly turned tyrannical. He publicly humiliated cardinals, accused them of treason, even ordered one's torture. Within months, the same cardinals who'd voted for him fled Rome, declared his election invalid due to coercion, and crowned a rival Pope Clement VII, who promptly retreated to Avignon. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was institutional schizophrenia. For the next 39 years, Europe fractured along political fault lines. France, Scotland, and Spain backed the Avignon Pope. England, the Holy Roman Empire, and most Italian states recognized Rome, but the schism wasn't just about geography, it was about money. The Avignon court, now a well-oiled machine of taxation, refused to relinquish its revenue streams. Simultaneously, Rome's papacy milked its supporters dry to fund wars against rivals. Ordinary believers faced a surreal dilemma, paying tithes to two popes, each claiming the other was the Antichrist. The schism's most corrosive effect wasn't the dueling popes, it was the erosion of faith itself. When saints like Catherine of Siena begged for unity, their voices drowned in the noise of competing bureaucracies. Theologians like John Wycliffe began questioning whether the Church needed a pope at all. Meanwhile, kings exploited the division, playing both sides to extract concessions. Francis Charles VI even floated the idea of a third pope, a French-controlled puppet who'd rule from a neutral city. By the time the Council of Constance finally ended the schism in 1417, deposing 3 rival popes and electing Martin V, the damage was irreversible. The Avignon Papacy hadn't just moved the Vatican, it had broken the idea of a unified church. The cracks it created would later widen into the Protestant Reformation, proving that when faith becomes a geopolitical chessboard, everyone loses. The Great Schism didn't begin in 1417. Its roots stretched back to the moment Clement V first crossed the Rhone, trading Rome's chaos for a gilded cage, and forgetting that cages have 2 sides. The wealth that flowed through Avignon would make modern billionaires weep with envy. Gold wasn't just stored in the papal treasury, it dripped from the very walls of the Palais des Papes. Mitres encrusted with sapphires the size of walnuts, reliquaries said to hold fragments of the true cross, even a solid gold throne rumored to weigh as much as 3 men. These weren't just sacred objects. They were trophies of an empire masquerading as a church. But where did it all go? The trail of Avignon's plundered treasures reads like a medieval heist novel, complete with vanishing acts and shadowy middlemen. Start with the relics. By the 1400s, the Avignon Papacy had amassed a collection that put Constantinople's holy hoard to shame. A single inventory from Clement VI's reign lists over 200 sacred items, thorns from Christ's crown, vials of the Virgin Mary's milk, even the jawbone of John the Baptist. These weren't merely spiritual symbols, they were cash cows. Pilgrims paid handsomely to glimpse them, and local churches coughed up fortunes to borrow them for festivals. But after the papacy returned to Rome, the relics began disappearing. Some vanished during the Great Schism, when rival popes used them as bargaining chips. Others were quietly sold to fund wars. The most chilling theory: many were fakes all along, their value tied not to divine provenance but to the Church's talent for theatrics. Then there were the jewels. The papal tiara alone, a 3-tiered crown, was said to hold 7,000 pearls and 600 rubies. Records from the French Revolution tell of soldiers storming Avignon's churches, hacking apart altars with bayonets in search of hidden gems. They found caches of emeralds sewn into vestments, gold thread woven so thickly into tapestries that they shimmered like molten metal, but the real prize, the legendary treasure of the popes, was never recovered. Some say it was smuggled out in 1791, packed into wine barrels and floated down the Rhone to Swiss bankers. Others swear it's still hidden beneath the Palais, buried in chambers sealed during the Revolution's bloodiest days. The paper trail only deepens the mystery. Auction records from Paris in 1803 show ecclesiastical items sold to anonymous buyers, items that match descriptions of Avignon's lost liturgical weapons: a gem-studded crozier, a silver chalice engraved with Clement V's crest. Even Napoleon's looters seemed to prioritize papal gold, shipping crates of it back to Paris before mysteriously losing the manifests. Today, scattered clues remain. A 15th-century mitre turns up in a London auction house, its provenance suspiciously vague. A reliquary surfaces in a private collection, its enamel work unmistakably Avignon's. But the bulk of the treasure, gone, either melted down for coinage, hidden in some forgotten vault, or still circulating through the black market, its origins scrubbed clean by centuries of middlemen. The bitter irony: the very greed that built Avignon's splendor also doomed its legacy. When revolutionaries finally ransacked the palace, they weren't just destroying symbols of tyranny. They were erasing the receipts of history's most audacious holy heist. What survived wasn't gold or jewels, but something far more damning: the knowledge that for 70 years, the holiest seat in Christendom ran not on faith, but on the coldest currency of all human devotion, bought and sold. The whispers started in alleyways and taverns, scribbled on scraps of parchment and nailed to church doors under cover of darkness. The so-called Vicar of Christ wallows in gold while his flock starves, one anonymous pamphlet sneered. Another, crudely illustrated with a horned pope clutching a money bag, declared Avignon, the whore of Babylon's new throne. These weren't just insults, they were weapons. While the Avignon popes feasted in their palace, a shadow war raged in the streets, fueled by poison pen propaganda so vicious it would make modern smear campaigns blush. The most infamous attack came from a Franciscan friar known only as the Hawk. His sermons, secretly copied and distributed across Europe, spared no one. Clement VI dresses in the skins of the poor, he thundered, accusing the Pope of lining his robes with fur stripped from beggars' backs. Even more explosive was his claim that Avignon's cardinals held black masses in the palace cellars, signing pacts with demons to prolong their rule. Was any of it true? Unlikely, but truth wasn't the point. The Hawk's rants found eager audiences in cities where church taxes had emptied granaries. Then there were the illustrated broadsheets, medieval memes designed for illiterate crowds. One showed Pope Benedict XII as a wolf in shepherd's clothing, devouring a lamb labeled tithe. Another depicted Urban V fleeing Rome with sacks of gold, chased by skeletal figures symbolizing plague victims. These images didn't just circulate in back alleys, they were slipped into prayer books and posted on pilgrimage routes, ensuring maximum exposure. But who bankrolled this propaganda blitz? The money trail leads to surprising places. Ledgers from Sienna's city archives reveal payments to traveling scribes from the Holy Roman Emperor's agents, a clear attempt to undermine French influence. Even more damning are letters between English bishops discussing funds for godly tracts against the false pope. But the most shocking sponsor might have been the Visconti family of Milan, whose bankers funneled cash to satirists while publicly pledging loyalty to Avignon. Their motive, simple revenge. When a Visconti prince was excommunicated for rebellion, the family turned the Pope's own weapon, propaganda, against him. The irony: these attacks often backfired. When a particularly vicious pamphlet accused Clement VI of fathering bastards, the Pope didn't deny it. He joked about his virility, disarming critics with charisma. Meanwhile, the Church's own scribes fired back, labeling reformers as madmen and heretics, but the damage was done. By painting Avignon as a den of vice, these anonymous attacks didn't just erode faith in individual popes, they planted the idea that the entire system was rotten. Long before Luther nailed his theses to a door, the seeds of rebellion were sown not with theology, but with ink and rage. Behind the gilded doors of the Avignon Papacy, women pulled strings in shadows so deep even history struggles to remember their names. Take the scandalous legend of La Papes, the whispered tale of a mistress so powerful she allegedly issued decrees from Clement VI's bed. Chroniclers described her holding court in the papal chambers, receiving supplicants while draped in silks paid for by bishop appointments. Was she real? No official record names her, but that's precisely the point. Avignon's women wielded influence in ways the Church dared not document. Then there were the noblewomen who turned diplomacy into an art form. Countess Mahaut of Artois didn't just visit Avignon, she brokered treaties there. When France and England teetered on war, it was her letters that shuttled between courts, her feasts where cardinals and ambassadors accidentally found themselves seated beside sworn enemies. Unlike male diplomats bound by protocol, women like Mahaut could float between factions, their influence masked by the assumption they were mere socialites. But the true power players were the papal nieces. When Benedict XII needed to placate a rebellious French duke, he didn't send a cardinal, he dispatched his niece, Jeanne de Beaufort, with a dowry so large it amounted to a bribe. Her marriage to the duke's son wasn't romance, it was a territorial negotiation disguised as a wedding. Similarly, Clement VI's niece, Aliénor de Comminges, became his unofficial spymaster, her network of ladies-in-waiting gathering secrets from drunken courtiers and love-struck clerks. These women left traces in unexpected places. Financial records show mysterious payments to the Dame of Vainask, for services rendered during treaty negotiations. Gossipy letters between Italian merchants mention a shadowy figure called the Scarlet Contessa, who could secure audiences with the Pope for a fee. Even Petrarch, no fan of Avignon's excesses, grudgingly admitted that certain noblewomen held the keys to both heaven and the counting house. The bitter irony, their erasure began the moment the papacy returned to Rome. Later chroniclers, eager to paint Avignon as a den of masculine vice, scrubbed these women from the record. But their legacy lingers in the margins, in snide remarks about petticoat governments, in ledgers where payments to female advisors suddenly vanish after 1377. The forgotten women of Avignon didn't just share power, they proved how easily a system built to exclude them could be hijacked from within. The papal court in Avignon didn't just pray for divine protection, it paid for eyes and ears in every corner of Europe. Behind the pious facade of cardinals' robes and whispered vespers thrived a spy network so sophisticated it rivaled modern intelligence agencies. Take Cardinal Guy de Boulogne, a trusted confidant of Pope Innocent VI. By day he presided over liturgical ceremonies, by night he smuggled encrypted reports to the King of France, detailing papal troop movements and secret negotiations with England. His betrayal wasn't unique. Half the Sacred College allegedly received pensions from foreign rulers, their loyalties dangling like puppets on gold strings. The system ran on coded language so subtle it hid in plain sight. A bishop's letter mentioning the health of our vineyards might signal impending war, while a request for additional candles could mean a bribe demand. The Avignon Chancery employed cryptographers who perfected null cipher techniques, embedding messages in seemingly innocent texts by reading only every third word. One intercepted letter from a Castilian cardinal to his king contained a recipe for partridge stew. Only when heated over a flame did invisible ink reveal troop deployments along the French border. But the most audacious operations targeted rival courts directly. Papal agents infiltrated the household of Emperor Charles IV, posing as scribes while copying sensitive documents. Others bribed Venetian glassblowers to embed tiny scrolls inside decorative beads, smuggled to Constantinople in merchant caravans. When English spies intercepted a shipment, they found not just secrets but proof of Avignon's reach, detailed sketches of Dover's coastal defenses, drawn by a monk on pilgrimage. The irony, the popes feared betrayal most from their own inner circle. Clement VI once hosted a banquet where every dish contained a hidden note testing cardinals' loyalty. Those who reported the messages were rewarded, those who didn't found themselves reassigned to frozen dioceses in Norway, yet even paranoia couldn't stop the leaks. When Urban V planned his return to Rome, the French crown knew before the decree was signed thanks to a tipsy chamberlain who traded gossip for a barrel of Burgundy wine. This shadow war had real consequences. In 1354, a decoded letter exposed Cardinal Talleyrand's plot to sell Avignon's military secrets to Naples. The resulting scandal saw 3 cardinals stripped of their titles, their ceremonial rings melted down as punishment, but the system never truly died. It just adapted. By the schism's peak, rival popes employed identical spy rings, each convinced God favored their subterfuge. The lesson was clear: in Avignon, even salvation had a price, and the best seats in heaven went to those who bought the right secrets. Among the countless legends swirling around the Avignon Papacy, few are as tantalizing or as hotly debated as the so-called prophecy of the popes, attributed to the 12th century Irish Saint Malachy. This cryptic list purportedly describes every future pope with eerie precision, including a chilling prediction of Avignon's exile. The entry for the period reads, Ex Castro Tibris, from a castle on the Tiber, interpreted as a reference to Clement V's origins near the river, followed by the ominous phrase, Axis in medietate signi, the axe in the midst of the sign, suggesting a split in the church. But is this prophecy genuine foresight, or a clever forgery designed to rewrite history, the manuscript's origins alone raise red flags. It first surfaced in 1590, centuries after Malachy's death, conveniently published by a Benedictine monk named Arnold de Wyon during the Counter-Reformation, a time when the Catholic Church desperately needed to reinforce its divine authority. Scholar after scholar has pointed to glaring anachronisms in the text, from descriptions of heraldic symbols that didn't exist in Malachy's era to oddly specific details about popes who reigned just before the document's discovery. The Avignon entry, in particular, fits suspiciously well with hindsight, as if tailored to explain the scandal after the fact, yet the prophecy's defenders argue it's too precise to dismiss entirely. They highlight how the motto for Urban V, Gallus Viscums, the Gallic Viscount, uncannily matches his French nobility and his failed attempt to return the papacy to Rome. Even more striking is the phrase for Gregory XI, Novus de Virgin 40, a new one from the Strong Virgin, which some link to the Virgin Mary's alleged appearances urging him to leave Avignon. Could these really be coincidences? The truth likely lies in the murky intersection of faith and fabrication. Medieval Europe thrived on prophetic texts, from the visions of Hildegard of Bingen to the politically charged predictions of Joachim of Fior. The Avignon popes, desperate to legitimize their fractured rule, may have encouraged or even commissioned such prophecies to frame their era as divinely ordained rather than a power grab. Later editors, seizing on the controversy, could have tweaked the text to fit known events. What makes the Malachy prophecy endure isn't its accuracy, but its audacity. Whether forged or divine, it forced the Church to confront an uncomfortable question: if even a saint foresaw Avignon's corruption, how could its leaders claim they were doing God's work? The axe didn't just split the Church, it exposed the brittle line between prophecy and propaganda. A masterpiece can be the ultimate distraction. Just ask the Avignon popes. While their courts dripped with corruption, they commissioned some of the most breathtaking art of the medieval world, not to glorify God, but to silence critics. Take Simone Martina's frescoes in the Palais des Papes, golden halos so luminous they blinded viewers to the grift happening beneath them, his famed Madonna of Humility, showing the Virgin seated on the ground in simplicity, was painted for Clement VI, a pope who owned more tapestries than some kingdoms. The irony couldn't have been thicker. This was performance art on a sacred scale, designed to rewrite reality with pigment and gold leaf. Music was another weapon in the propaganda arsenal. Avignon didn't just have choirs, it had full orchestras disguised as chapel ensembles. Composers like Philippe de Vitry crafted polyphonic masses so complex they were called the arithmetic of angels, but the sheet music hid darker calculations. De Vitry's patron, the same Cardinal Annibaldo who embezzled funds meant for famine relief, when peasants starved outside the palace gates, the cardinal soothed their outrage with harmonies so ethereal they numbed dissent. Even the papal choir boys were political pawns. Many were sons of noble families, their angelic voices ensuring their father's loyalty. Then there were the tapestries. Woven with scenes of saints refusing gold, they hung in halls where bishops auctioned off benefices to the highest bidder. One legendary piece, the martyrdom of St. Lawrence, showed the saint roasted on a gridiron for refusing to surrender church treasure. It was commissioned by Benedict XII, a pope who simultaneously raised taxes on monasteries to fund his nephew's cardinalate. The message was clear: martyrdom made great art, but compliance kept you alive. The brilliance of this artistic facade was its adaptability. When Petrarch mocked Avignon as the sewer of the earth, the papal court didn't silence him. They hired his friend, the painter Matteo Giovannetti, to cover the palace walls with frescoes of virtuous scholars. Suddenly, Petrarch's critique seemed hypocritical. How could a city that patronized such beauty be morally bankrupt? The gaslighting was exquisite, but cracks eventually showed. Martin's last work in Avignon, a crucifixion scene, contained a hidden rebellion. Amid the mourners, he painted a figure clutching a money bag, a detail only visible up close. Was it a confession, a protest? Either way, the truth leaked through. Art could gild a regime, but not forever. When the papacy finally fled back to Rome, the frescoes stayed behind, fading testaments to a lie too lavish to sustain. The corridors of the Palais des Papes whisper more than just secrets, they echo with the footsteps of the dead. Locals swear the palace isn't just a monument to history, but a vessel for its unfinished business. Take the infamous Red Ghost of Pope Clement VI. Visitors and staff alike report a crimson-robed figure gliding through the grand chapel, his face hidden beneath a shadowed mitre. The timing always at midnight, the exact hour Clement signed the order to massacre the last Cathar heretics in Montségur. Survivors of the siege supposedly cursed him with their dying breaths, vowing his soul would never rest. Now, centuries later, the phantom is said to pause before the chapel's crucifix, as if awaiting a forgiveness that never comes. But the most chilling legend isn't about a pope at all, it's about the palace's silent victims. During renovations in the 1800s, workers broke into a sealed chamber beneath the consistory hall. Inside, they found a macabre tableau, dozens of skeletons, still clad in the tattered robes of Fraticelli monks, their hands bound with rusted chains. Church records claim Benedict XII expelled the radical Franciscans for heresy, but local lore tells a darker tale. Witnesses reported hearing the faint echo of chanting in the dead of night, a dirge in archaic Occitan, the same tongue the Fraticelli used in their forbidden prayers. Some say the chanting stops abruptly, replaced by the sound of crackling flames, though no fire is ever seen. Then there's the curse of the Templar gold. After Philip IV destroyed the order, rumors swirled that Clement V hid a portion of their treasure in Avignon's underground tunnels, but those who have dared to search tell of a hooded figure with empty eye sockets blocking their path, his skeletal fingers clutching a Templar cross. The few who have escaped claim the specter whispers a warning. The Pope's bargain stays buried. Historians dismiss it as superstition until they note the bizarre fates of those who have probed too deep. A 19th-century antiquarian vanished after boasting he'd found the vault, leaving behind only a journal entry describing a cold breath from the stones themselves. Even modern archaeologists report equipment failures and sudden, unshakable dread in the palace's lower levels. The most haunting presence, though, isn't tied to violence or gold, it's the ghost of Petrarch's muse, Laura de Noves. The poet's unrequited love died in Avignon during the Black Death, her beauty undone by plague. Visitors to the palace garden swear they've seen a veiled woman in 14th-century dress, her fingers brushing the petals of the same white roses Petrarch immortalized in verse. When approached, she dissolves into mist, leaving only the faint scent of rosemary and herb medieval women used to ward off contagion. Is she a lingering memory of love lost, or a reminder of the fragility Avignon's popes tried so hard to outrun with their walls of gold? Perhaps the true curse of Avignon isn't a single specter, but the weight of history itself. Every stone in the palace seems to hum with unresolved regrets, popes who traded faith for power, martyrs forgotten by the very church they died for, lovers consumed by a world too busy with greed to notice their devotion. The ghosts don't just haunt, they testify, and their stories, whispered in the shadow of the papal throne, suggest that some sins aren't buried with the body. They echo. Gregory XI didn't just return to Rome, he defied an empire. By 1377, the Avignon Papacy had become a well-oiled machine of French influence, its cardinals and bankers entrenched in the system. But Gregory, a bookish man with a spine of steel, had reached his limit. What pushed him over the edge? A combination of divine visions, political brinkmanship, and a radical mystic named Catherine of Siena, whose letters to the Pope read like spiritual battle cries. "Be a man," she scolded him in one missive, urging him to abandon Avignon's stench of sin and reclaim Rome's destiny. Catherine wasn't just preaching, she was orchestrating. Behind the scenes, she rallied Italian nobles, negotiated with mercenaries, and even secured loans from Florentine bankers to fund Gregory's journey. The French court, sensing their golden goose slipping away, retaliated with threats. Cardinal Jean de Lagrange, a French bulldog in red robes, openly warned Gregory that leaving Avignon would be an act of war. Ships meant to carry the papal court were sabotaged. Loyal bishops suddenly found their revenues frozen. Rome, meanwhile, was a tinderbox. The Eternal City had decayed into a lawless ruin, its streets controlled by rival gangs like the infamous banderessi, who extorted pilgrims and ambushed church officials. Gregory knew returning meant walking into a lion's den, but Catherine had a plan. She convinced the warlord Giovanni di Vico, yes, the same man who'd terrorized Urban V, to pledge loyalty to the Pope, securing safe passage through the Tiber Valley. Even the bitterest enemies of the Church recognized that Rome without its Pope was a city without a soul. The journey itself was a spectacle. Gregory's convoy, stretching for miles, included not just cardinals but an army of mercenaries hired with Florentine gold. French spies lurked in every port, and at one point, a band of brigands, likely French agents in disguise, ambushed the rear guard near Marseille, but the Pope pressed on, landing at Corneto in January 1377. The reception was anything but holy. Roman mobs, whipped into frenzy by rumors that Gregory would reinstate heavy taxes, stormed the Vatican within weeks of his arrival. The Pope's own chamberlain was stabbed to death in a riot over bread prices, his body left to rot in the Piazza Navona, yet through the chaos, Gregory held firm. He knew Avignon's luxury had been a gilded trap, and Catherine's fiery letters now arriving weekly reminded him of the stakes. "You are the gardener," she wrote, "charged by Christ to tend Rome's vines, not some French king's orchard." Her words cut through the political calculus, framing his return as a spiritual imperative rather than a logistical nightmare. The backlash from Avignon was swift. French cardinals declared Gregory's move void, citing duress from fanatics. King Charles V of France froze all papal assets, leaving Rome's treasury emptier than a beggar's bowl. But the damage was done. Gregory's return, however tumultuous, shattered the illusion that the papacy could be forever tethered to French interests. When he died just a year later, some say of exhaustion, his last act was to whisper directions for his tomb, facing St. Peter's, not the Rhone, a small defiance perhaps, but one that echoed through history. The Avignon exile had ended, but the fractures it left behind would soon explode into the greatest crisis the Church had ever seen. Gregory XI's death in 1378 didn't just create a vacancy, it lit the fuse for an explosion that would rip the Church in two. The conclave to elect his successor should have been straightforward, but Rome was a pressure cooker. Mobs surrounded the Vatican, demanding an Italian pope, their screams so loud cardinals could barely hear each other. When the vote finally went to Urban VI, a reformer known for his temper, it seemed like a compromise, but within weeks Urban's true colors emerged. He publicly humiliated cardinals, accused them of treason, even ordered one's torture. The same men who'd elected him now feared for their lives, so they did the unthinkable. Fleeing Rome under cover of night, they declared Urban's election invalid, claiming the mobs had coerced them, and crowned a rival pope, Clement VII, who promptly retreated to Avignon. The Great Schism had begun. For the next 39 years, Christendom faced a surreal reality: two popes, two curias, two sets of cardinals, each claiming to be God's sole representative on earth. France, Scotland, and Spain threw their weight behind Avignon's Clement, while England, the Holy Roman Empire, and most Italian states recognized Rome's Urban. But this wasn't just a diplomatic headache, it was a spiritual crisis. Ordinary parishioners didn't know which Mass was valid, which sacraments would save their souls. Priests in border regions offered both rites, hedging their bets. The Church's authority, already brittle after decades in Avignon, now crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. Avignon's second act as a papal seat was even more brazen than the first. Clement VII and his successor, Benedict XIII, transformed the palace into a propaganda machine. They minted coins stamped with their likenesses, issued decrees condemning Rome's false pope, and even commissioned frescoes depicting their rivals as the Antichrist. Meanwhile, Rome's popes retaliated by excommunicating entire kingdoms loyal to Avignon. The chaos reached its peak when a third pope emerged from the Council of Pisa in 1409, a desperate attempt at unity that only deepened the divide. The Council of Constance in 1417 was supposed to end the madness, but its resolution was anything but clean. After years of maneuvering, the assembled bishops finally deposed all three rival popes and elected Martin V as the sole legitimate pontiff. Yet Avignon's Benedict XIII refused to go quietly. Holed up in a fortress near Valencia, he clung to his title until death, his few remaining cardinals scattering like ghosts. The schism officially ended, but its scars never fully healed. The council's reforms, meant to prevent future splits, instead centralized power in ways that fueled later corruption, planting seeds for the Protestant Reformation. Avignon's legacy wasn't just broken unity, it was broken trust. The schism exposed the papacy as a political institution, its spiritual authority negotiable. When reformers like Jan Hus and later Martin Luther railed against church corruption, they pointed to Avignon as proof that popes could fall, and that perhaps the whole system needed to burn. The Palais on the Rhone still stands today, its empty halls a monument to an era when faith became a battlefield, and the line between heaven and power blurred beyond recognition. Take a look at today's Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, and you'll find shadows of Avignon lurking in its marble halls. The same financial maneuvering that fueled the papal court's excesses 7 centuries ago has resurfaced in modern scandals, proving some playbooks never go out of style. Consider the infamous Banco Ambrosiano collapse of 1982, where the Vatican was accused of funneling money to shady offshore accounts, mirroring the way Avignon's popes used Florentine bankers to hide their debts. And just as 14th century cardinals sold bishoprics to the highest bidder, 20th century officials were caught in schemes trading favors for cash, like the 1989 arrest of Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who allegedly oversaw a web of money laundering so tangled it earned the nickname the Vatican's Black Ledger. The parallels don't end there. Avignon's annates, the taxes siphoned from dioceses across Europe, find their echo in today's Peter's Pence, a fund meant for charity that investigations revealed was partially diverted to cover the Vatican's operating expenses. In both eras, the faithful believed their donations built hospitals and fed the poor, while behind closed doors, the money greased the wheels of power. Even the methods of deflection remain eerily similar. When 14th century critics like Catherine of Siena railed against Avignon's greed, popes commissioned dazzling art to distract the masses. Centuries later, when the Vatican Bank faced scrutiny in 2015, it launched a highly publicized transparency campaign while quietly settling lawsuits out of court. Yet the most striking parallel isn't in the scandals themselves, it's in the unshakable impunity. Just as Avignon's popes weathered protests and survived schisms by relying on their divine right to rule, modern Vatican officials have dodged accountability by invoking sovereign immunity. When Italian prosecutors demanded access to bank records in 2019, the Holy See cited centuries-old treaties shielding it from secular law. Sound familiar? It's the same logic Clement V used when he ignored demands to audit his treasurer's books, declaring, "God's justice is not of this world." Perhaps the real lesson of Avignon isn't that the Church forgot its past, but that it learned too well. The financial alchemy perfected on the Rhone, turning faith into currency, salvation into collateral, never truly disappeared. It just evolved, trading parchment for spreadsheets and gold florins for Swiss francs, and while the Vatican now employs PR teams instead of fresco painters, the script remains the same: when the offering plate overflows, someone always pockets the change. Beneath the well-documented scandals of the Avignon Papacy lies a shadow world of whispered legends, tales so explosive they've fueled conspiracy theories for centuries. Among the most persistent is the claim that the Papal Palace wasn't just a seat of power, but a vault for forbidden knowledge, including documents tracing Jesus' bloodline through medieval Europe. Proponents point to the sudden appearance of Le Serpent Rouge, a cryptic manuscript surfacing in the 1960s, which describes a secret chamber beneath the Palais des Papes holding the genealogy of the sacred vine. Could this myth have roots in reality? The timing is suspicious. When Clement V disbanded the Knights Templar in 1312, their vast archives, rumored to contain everything from ancient Gnostic texts to records of heretical royal lineages, vanished overnight. Eyewitness accounts from the era mention wagons leaving Avignon under heavy guard, their contents never logged in papal inventories. The Freemason connection deepens the mystery. 18th-century Masonic lore speaks of the Avignon scrolls, said to be smuggled out by dissident cardinals and later safeguarded by lodges in Lyon. These documents allegedly revealed a startling truth: the Merovingian kings of France weren't just rulers but direct descendants of Christ through Mary Magdalene, a claim later popularized by books like The Holy Blood and The Holy Grail. Skeptics dismiss this as fantasy, but intriguing clues linger. Graffiti found in the palace's lower levels include symbols eerily resembling Templar and Masonic sigils, a square and compass etched beside a fleur-de-lis, with dates matching the Templars' suppression. Even more compelling, the palace's architectural quirks. Secret passages branch off from the papal bedchamber, one leading to a bricked-up room discovered in 1903. Workmen reported finding charred parchment fragments and an empty iron chest stamped with a rose cross, the emblem of Rosicrucian orders claiming descent from the Templars. Then there's the curious case of Cardinal Jacques de Molay, no relation to the Templar Grand Master burned at the stake. This de Molay served as Avignon's treasurer under Benedict XIII. His private correspondence, uncovered in a Spanish monastery in 2012, references the legacy of the broken seal and payments to the keepers of the garden. Conspiracy theorists argue this was code for a shadow network preserving Templar secrets, possibly including the so-called Chinon parchment, a controversial document allegedly absolving the Templars of heresy, which vanished from the Vatican archives for centuries before mysteriously reappearing in 2001. Historians counter that de Molay's letters refer to routine land management, but the whispers persist. The most audacious theory involves the Rennes-le-Château affair. In the 1880s, a French priest named Bérenger Saunière reportedly discovered cryptic parchments in his rural church, leading to sudden wealth. Conspiracists insist these papers trace back to Avignon, smuggled out during the Papal Schism. Saunière's renovation of his church included odd touches: a demonic statue, a Latin inscription reading, Terribilis isti locus ist, this place is terrible, mirroring the occult imagery found in Avignon's surviving frescoes, where pagan symbols lurk beneath Christian iconography. Was Saunière's treasure real, or just another chapter in the mythos? Either way, the story's grip on popular imagination reveals an uncomfortable truth: Avignon's allure isn't just its documented history, but the ghosts of stories it refuses to tell. What makes these theories endure isn't their plausibility, but their symbolism. The Avignon Papacy was, at its core, an era of duality: holy men acting as politicians, sacred vows broken for gold. In that light, the idea of lost gospels or royal bloodlines feels less like fantasy and more like poetic justice. Whether any hidden truths lie buried beneath the palace's stones, one thing is certain: the whispers themselves have become relics, artifacts of humanity's endless hunger for secrets too potent to stay forgotten. The Avignon Papacy wasn't just a chapter in church history, it was a seismic rupture, a 70-year experiment where faith collided with raw power, and the fallout reshaped Christianity forever. Picture the scene, a papacy dripping in gold yet drowning in scandal, where holy men brokered deals like kings and salvation, carried a price tag. Was this a betrayal of the Church's spiritual mission? Or was it the only way to survive in an era where thrones were won by daggers and deception? On one hand, the evidence is damning. The popes of Avignon turned piety into profit, selling indulgences like market goods, stacking the College of Cardinals with French puppets, and building a palace so lavish it made emperors blush. When Catherine of Siena scolded Gregory XI for feeding on the gold of the poor, she wasn't exaggerating, she was describing a system rigged to enrich the few at the expense of the faithful. The Black Death should have been a moment of humility. Instead, Clement VI partied through the plague, his courtiers dancing in jeweled masks while bodies piled up outside. To critics like Petrarch, this wasn't just corruption, it was sacrilege, a wholesale surrender of spiritual authority to the same greed Christ drove from the temple. Yet the defenders of Avignon push back with a gritty counterargument: survival isn't pretty. In the 1400s, Rome wasn't just chaotic, it was lethal. Warring clans controlled the streets, basilicas crumbled into ruins, and any pope who dared return risked assassination or worse. Avignon offered stability, a fortress where the Church could regroup amid Europe's endless wars. The palace's walls weren't just for show, they were a lifeline, and let's not forget the popes weren't the only ones playing dirty. Kings like Philip IV didn't just pressure the Church, they held knives to its throat, demanding control or else. In that light, Avignon's compromises look less like cowardice and more like realpolitik in a world where power trumped prayer. So where does that leave us? Perhaps the truest lesson of Avignon isn't about good versus evil, but about what happens when institutions meant to transcend politics get swallowed by them. The papal court didn't just move, it mutated, adapting to a world where faith was currency and influence was the only gospel that mattered. The schisms, the scandals, the whispers of poison and betrayal, all of it exposed an uncomfortable truth: even the holiest thrones are still just chairs, and the men who sit in them are only human. What do you think? Was Avignon a necessary evil or a spiritual catastrophe? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're hooked on history's darkest secrets, don't forget to subscribe. After all, the past isn't done surprising us yet.